Most people spend a large part of their life imagining different versions of their future. They think about the kind of person they want to become, the freedom they want to have, or the kind of life they want to build over the next 5 or 10 years. Sometimes these ideas are very clear. They can imagine themselves becoming financially stable and living a completely different kind of life from the one they have right now. And for a short moment, these possibilities feel real to them. But for most people, something unusual happens after that. The idea stays at the level of imagination, but never properly turns into action. Not because people completely stop caring about those goals, but because somewhere between imagining a different life and actually building it, they quietly step back. And most of the time, they don't even realize it is happening. So in this video, we're going to discuss why that happens, how this pattern develops, and how people quietly give up on life before they actively begin to take real actions for the version of life they want to create. Welcome to the glitch culture, where we examine the behaviors people normalize without realizing what they lead to. When you think about why you haven't started something important in your life, it usually doesn't feel like you are avoiding it. It feels like you're still preparing. You think you are in a phase where you're trying to understand things better before beginning. You might believe that once things become clear, or once you feel ready, you will start properly. Because of this, you don't feel like you've given up. But if you look at how you actually operate, when you try to start something on your own, a different pattern becomes visible. From the beginning, most people are trained to work in environments where the structure is already provided. For example, in school, you're not deciding what to study or how to approach it. You're given subjects, chapters, and a timeline. You're told what needs to be done and by when. If you follow those instructions, you perform well. The same pattern continues in jobs. You're given specific tasks. There are deadlines. There are expectations. There is feedback. You know when something is completed and whether it is correct or not. Over time, you get used to this way of working. You become good at doing things when the task is clearly defined, when there is step-by-step process, when someone is expecting a result from you. This is how your ability to take action develops. Now compare this to what happens when you try to start something on your own. Let's say you want to build something, learn a skill seriously, or move in a new direction in life. In this situation, no one is giving you a step-by-step plan. There is no fixed list of instructions like, first do this, then do that, then expect this result. There is also no immediate feedback telling you that you're doing it correctly, where you are making progress. So when you sit down to start, your mind tries to apply the same approach it is used to. It looks for a clear first step, a defined process, and a predictable outcome. But in self-directed work, especially at the beginning, these things are not fully available. You may have a general direction, but you do not have a complete map. This creates confusion, not because the task is impossible, but because the way you're used to working does not match the situation. Instead of starting and figuring things out step by step, you begin asking questions like, where exactly should I start? What if I start the wrong way? Should I learn more before doing anything? These questions seem reasonable, but they create a delay because you're trying to remove uncertainty before taking action. In reality, that is not possible. When you work on something independently, the early phase is always unclear. You understand things only after you begin and continue for some time. But if you're used to situations where clarity is given before action, this feels uncomfortable. So instead of moving forward, you keep thinking. Now another pattern starts to form. You begin treating life decisions like choices that need to be perfectly selected before committing. You think, If this path is not clearly going to work, I should not spend time with it. Maybe there is a better option. Maybe I should explore more before committing. So you move from one idea to another. You read about different paths. You compare options. You imagine different outcomes. But you do not stay with one direction long enough to experience how it actually works. This creates a false sense of progress. You feel like you're doing something because you're thinking actively about your future. But thinking is not the same as engaging with the process. Because of this, something important never happens. You never build a routine around that work. Experience consistent effort over time and understand how long results actually take. So every conclusion you make is based on assumption. For example, you may think something is too difficult, or not suitable for you, or not worth the effort. But these conclusions are not based on sustained experience. They are based on short interaction. Over time, this affects how you see yourself. You begin to believe that you are a type of person who cannot stay consistent. You lose interest too quickly. You struggle to follow through. But in reality, the issue is different. You have never trained yourself to operate without external structure. So when you face a situation where you have to decide your own steps, continue without pressure, and work without immediate results, you feel lost. And instead of recognizing this as a skill gap that needs to be developed, you interpret it as a sign that says that maybe this path is not right, or maybe you are not ready. So you step back, not because you failed, but because you encountered a situation that required a different way of operating, and you were not prepared for it. This is why most people don't start, not because they lack ideas or ambition, but because the way they've been trained to work does not support independent, self-directed actions. Now look at what actually happens after that moment where you step back. You don't feel like you stopped. You still think about doing something meaningful. You still have ideas in your head. You still tell yourself that you will start at some point. So from your point of view, nothing has ended. But your behavior starts changing in a very specific way. The next time you come across something that feels important, a skill, an idea, or a direction, you don't ignore it. You engage with it, but only at the beginning. You spend time understanding it. You look at how others are doing it. You imagine yourself doing it as well. So it feels like you're moving in the right direction. But very quickly, you shift from doing to evaluating. Instead of continuing with basic, repeated effort, you start trying to answer questions like, is this the best option available to me? How long will this realistically take? What are the chances that this will actually work? These questions appear before you have spent enough time doing the work. So you don't have real answers, but you still try to decide. Because of that, your decision is based on incomplete information. And when something is unclear, your default response is to reduce effort. You don't make a clear decision to stop. You just stop continuing. You skip a day, then another day. Then the activity is no longer part of your routine. After that, you move to something else. That next thing follows the same pattern. You start with interest. You spend some time understanding it. You begin to think about outcomes very early. And then you reduce effort again. This repetition is important because after a few cycles, it starts forming a habit, not a habit of action, a habit of partial engagement. You become someone who starts things easily, but does not continue them long enough. And because this keeps happening, you begin to explain it to yourself in a certain way. You tell yourself, I'm still figuring things out. I haven't found the right path yet. I need more clarity before I commit. These explanations feel reasonable, but they hide the actual issue. The issue is not that you are exploring. The issue is that you are not staying with anything long enough to understand it. Now look at what this does over time. At the beginning, the delay feels small. You think you're just postponing things slightly. But as this pattern continues, the delay increases. What you plan to start this week moves to next week, then next month. Then it is no longer something you actively plan. It becomes something you might do later. And because there is no clear failure, it doesn't feel serious. You're still busy in daily life. You're still completing responsibilities. So there is no strong signal telling you that something is wrong. But internally, something is changing. Your expectations start adjusting based on your behavior. You stop expecting yourself to follow through. You stop believing that you can stay consistent for long periods. You begin assuming that you'll start things, but you probably won't continue them. This assumption becomes part of how you see yourself. So the next time you think about starting something, you don't approach it with full commitment. You approach it with limited mindset. You do enough to feel like you've engaged with it, but not enough to test yourself properly. This keeps you in a safe range. You avoid complete failure, but you also avoid real progress. Because real progress only happens when you stay with something long enough to struggle with it, adjust your approach, and repeat the effort consistently. Since that never happens, you never reach a point where anything becomes clear. You don't know how good you can actually become, how long things really might take, and what you are capable of building. Everything stays at the level of assumption. And over time, those assumptions start feeling like facts. You begin to think, maybe this is not for me. Maybe I'm not built for this. And maybe this kind of life is not realistic. But if you look at the full sequence, nothing was tested completely. No direction was followed long enough to produce a real result. Now bring it back to the main point. Giving up on life does not always look like a clear decision. It happens through repeated behavior. You get interested in something. You spend a few days or weeks around it. You think about where it could lead. But before anything becomes stable, you stop putting in regular effort. Then you move to something else and repeat the same pattern. After enough time, this becomes your normal way of living your life. You're always thinking about possibilities, but you are not turning any of them into something real. So life keeps moving forward, but without direction, without depth, and without any clear evidence of what you could have achieved. That is how people give up before they even begin. Not by failing, but by never staying with anything long enough for something real to happen and blame life for not giving them enough opportunities.